Hey guys, today I'm going to explain to you why I was missing for 2 months, and that's because I was studying for the GRE. You know what? I'm not gonna even attempt to hold these books. There's too many. But today I just wanted to share my experience, maybe give you a little bit of encouragement and tips to study for the GRE, and yeah, just share my overall experience. I'm going to start with the actual test day, my just general impression of taking the test, and then some study tips for each section of the GRE, and then I'm going to talk about which books that I studied and which books are recommended and which books are kind of not. I scored a 164 on the verbal and 169 on the quantitative and 5.5 on the writing. My test center was an hour and a half away from my house, and I had to take it at 10 a.m. I had no choice because I live in Seoul, and there were only 2 test centers, both of which were an hour and a half away from my house, and both started at 10 a.m. So I practiced waking up really early, like 2 weeks prior to the GRE, in order to like help my body cope with waking up early and studying and taking that test early in the morning. Some supplies that I took were food, which I didn't end up eating because they only give you a 10-minute break, and if you go to the bathroom and come back, it's already 6 minutes gone, and you're so nervous that you don't even have time to eat food. So I just drank a little bit water and went back to take the test. I did take my blue light protection glasses, I think that's what they're called in English, because I had LASIK, and if I look at the computer screen for a super long time, my eyes get super dry and I can't focus. I also took some artificial tears to help with that eye dryness, and it was very dry. I had to wear a mask the entire time, and that was also difficult. So in order to help me cope with that too, I studied with a mask on. The tips I can tell you right now are use all the 60-second breaks between each section to rest your eyes, to clear your brain, to take some deep breaths or something, and answer all the questions. It's better to try to, guess randomly and get it right instead of like totally getting it wrong. And if you don't know a question, skip it and come back to it to save time and be more efficient, because every question is worth the same, and it's better to get an easy question right than spend all your time on a hard one. But these are really basic. So moving on with the study tips, I'm going to start with quantitative just because I don't really have much to say about this. I was not really concerned about the quantitative because it's like 10th grade. It's like American 10th grade math. I'm also double majoring in economics, which means that I am studying math like very often. And I wasn't really that bad at math in high school, so I was pretty okay. But the things that concerned me personally, because I'm a foreigner, was the way the questions were written. It really confused me when they asked me about ratio, percentages, like increase, decrease, questions that were worded like Jack has 2 more than twice the amount that Anne has. These kind of questions really confused me, so I was really careful to memorize all of those phrases. It's so much easier to just memorize it than try to understand it. And I got down all my formulas for like geometry. I'm really bad at like data interpretation and statistics, so I think those were the 2 things that I really tried to focus on. And I memorized all the formulas or the definitions of certain words. Like, I didn't know what product meant. It obviously means the thing that you get after multiplication, but those words I just didn't use in everyday life as a foreigner. I didn't go to an American school to learn math, so those were the things that I really focused on, and math was okay. I did really try to not like skim through the questions, because every time I did that I did get it wrong, so I try to be really thorough when I'm reading my questions. The verbal is probably the most concerning part for me. I think it's the thing that I spent the most time on. So verbal is basically, I think, 2 things that you can do. First is memorize a crazy amount of words, and the second is practice just reading comprehension questions. To memorize words, I bought this GRE Power Vocab workbook, this vocabulary word, whatever, this book. This has like 800 plus words, and I memorized all of that. And in order to study more words, every time I came across a word that I didn't know, I started to fill this journal with all the words that I don't know by looking up the dictionary by myself and memorizing all these words. I didn't memorize them just by looking at them. I don't know if I know that there's some people who do that. I am not that smart. I need my hands to move along with my brain. So I got like a bunch of just loose leaf papers that were lying around in my house and folded them in 4 sections. And on one side, I wrote the words that I need to memorize, and then the other I wrote the definitions, and then I folded it again to just repeat that process. And every time I came across a word that I just couldn't memorize, I moved it on to the next paper, and I just kept repeating that. Overall, I memorized like 1,000 words before going in to take the GRE, but there were still lots of words that I didn't know on the exam. I don't think it's possible to memorize all of the words on the that will come out on the GRE, but I think it's important to memorize as much as you can. And the words that are in this book definitely do come out on the GRE really often, so I think that if your vocabulary is weak like mine, it's important to memorize a ton of words because that's the easiest way to raise your verbal score. The next thing that I was really concerned about with the verbal section was reading comprehension. I'm not very good at that part either. And the GREs consists of basically 2 types of reading comprehension questions. The one is the one that you see on the TOEFL or any other reading comprehension test, and the other is a logic-based one where they give you like a really short prompt, and the question usually goes like, which of these assumptions, if true, weakens the argument the most or strengthens the argument the most. And these questions really took a lot of time for me. I practiced those questions, and once you get to practice them repeatedly, you get to see what the question will ask you before looking at the question itself just by reading the prompt. And I think it's really important to just practice as much as you can. For both of them, quantitative and verbal, just practice as much as you can. The writing was also really difficult for me just because I didn't have anybody to look at my writing and give me feedback. I didn't go around looking for a teacher, didn't want to spend money on the GRE. I had to like proofread, and at first it was really discouraging because every time I wrote an essay and I compared it to like a score 6 or score 5 essay, my essay sucked, and I really didn't know how to improve upon just by comparing like the model answer and my answer. But there are some workbooks that I will talk about a little bit later that really helped me build my writing skills and really build like a strategy to approach each question. So I think it's important to find the right workbook to work with. But some tips that I want to give about the writing part is, 1, include your experience in one of the examples. There's an issue task where they give you like a statement and they ask you, do you like agree with it or disagree with it? And you have to give like really specific examples to get a good score. And it's really hard to give super specific, lengthy examples with examples from like the history or politics or like really like specific issues. If you're a historian, if you're like a history major, great for you, but I'm not. I know about World War II, obviously, but I don't know if I know enough to use that for like a whole paragraph. So the length does matter on the GRE, so I think it's important to include like your experience as one of the examples, not all of them, obviously. One of the examples to like make your essay lengthy, because lengthy essays do get a better scores. Another thing is just learn a little bit about history before going in. I think it's really good to use your example, your like experience as an example, but also like a famous historic example. And before I went in to take the GRE, I looked at a few documentaries about American history. I knew so much about Korean history, but I can't use Korean history as an example just because it's hard to like explain the whole situation, to translate the Korean names into English names and maybe not get them accurate. So I just memorized American historical facts that were really like prominent in history. For example, like the New Deal or Watergate, Vietnam War, like any war that the US was involved in, any scandals that really shook the US like Bill Clinton or the Watergate, Trump, I don't know. Any of these issues I think were important, and I did actually use some of the things that I acquired from watching history documentaries into my writing, and I think they were very helpful. Lastly, just memorize some vocabulary words that to use in your GRE writing that are advanced. For example, I wrote the most salient example, or a conspicuous example, or conspicuous instance, or something something obviates something something, blah 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 precludes blah blah blah, or notwithstanding, words like that. The words that the people will recognize as GRE words, I think those may help you get a better score. I am not sure, but they do calculate how many different kinds of words you used on the GRE through like the computer, and maybe it will help you on that. And lastly, I'm just going to do a quick book review like I do on my channel of all the workbooks that I use to study for the GRE. So I use like 8 books. Let me show you. Oh my god. 8 books, and some of them were more helpful than the others. I'm going to talk about each one by brand. I think the worst book was this ETS one. It's so basic. There's not a lot of questions. It's probably really easy compared to, I think it was easy compared to the actual GRE that I took. So if you were to only solve this and go in and take the GRE, I don't think you'll get a good score. Also, the answers, they don't give you like a specific strategy to approach each problem. So if this is your first time taking the GRE, I don't recommend this book, but it's very accessible because you can buy it when you're registering for the GRE. If you don't have a lot of time and you need to buy like 1 or 2 books, I don't recommend this. But when you're registering for the GRE, you can cart like 2 model tests, and I definitely encourage you to do that because it's a computer-based test that looks the same as the real GRE, and it's a good resource. So get that from ETS. Don't get this though. Next, Kaplan. I did not use the math workbook just because it looked so boring, and I know that GRE books all look boring, but I didn't have a ton of time. I wanted to focus more on verbal because, as I told you earlier, I wasn't really too concerned about quantitative. But this verbal book is super heavy but does not have as much questions that I really wanted it to have. The words and the questions were a little bit different from all the other workbooks that I used, so I wasn't really sure how accurate this workbook reflected the real GRE, but I guess more problems the better. It wasn't bad at all, but one of the things that I liked about this book was that in the answers, they give you the definition for each word, unlike, for example, the Princeton ones. There's also like a practice test that comes with this that you can do online, so definitely go for that too. But overall, maybe it's because I didn't use the math one, I don't really recommend this one either. Next is the Princeton review. I have 3 books from them. All of them I used pretty well. This one, the vocab, just get any vocabulary book for GRE. They all look the same mostly. This one's super light, so I liked it. I have these 2. The one is the GRE Prep. There's 4 full-length practice tests and then like some on the internet. And then I have this 1027 GRE practice questions, and if you had to choose between the 2, get this one, just because it has so much more problems. It has a lot of drills that really helped me. One qualm I have about this book is that there's some like mistakes that the book made. There's some wrong answers, and I was very confused when like I solved the math problem, and I know that that's correct because I asked like other people to solve it and they all got the same answer as me, but this book says otherwise and the explanation is completely wrong. Other than like 1 or 2 things that were like that, this book was pretty good, so I do recommend this one. Another thing that I really liked about the Princeton one was that it gave a very, very thorough, strategic way to solve like the writing questions. So one of the strategies that I really liked that this book introduced was the T-chart, where you write agree or disagree and try to think of, brainstorm examples for each position, like examples that will agree with the statement and examples that disagrees with the statement. And I really like that strategy because it helps you think of things really quickly and decide upon which stance you're going to take when writing the essay. If you had to choose one book because you don't have time or something, or you want to save money and not buy a bunch of books, I recommend this book. This book is awesome. It's the 5-pound book of GRE practice problems by Manhattan Prep. It is super heavy, super thick, but it is worth the money because there's so many problems in here. And I love how they distinguished the reading comprehension section into 2 sections, where one is just the reading comprehension, basic reading comprehension, and the other is logic based. And I really need to practice for the logic based questions, and none of the other workbooks offered any practice for specifically that kind of question. But this book has like 60 problems just to help you practice logic-based reading comprehension. So I really like that. All of the math problems were really helpful. They were really close to the actual GRE. And the essay part was actually pretty fun too. It wasn't as helpful as the Princeton review one, because the Princeton review one actually gives you like a specific strategy. But the Manhattan Prep one was fun because there were a lot of different types of essays. In a lot of cases, the other workbooks just show like a very generic essay where there's like an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and then a conclusion. And that's safe, but it wasn't fun. But the Manhattan Prep one had a lot of really fun essays. So as a person who solved this last, it was fun. If you were studying the essay, don't look at this one first, because they give you a ton of like different essay structures, and that might actually be more confusing and not give you a lot of practice. Definitely go for the Princeton one first. That is it for today. Overall, the cost that I studied for 2 months, and the cost for all of these books was like $150 at most, because I think most of them I bought secondhand, but like secondhand that's like really good quality secondhand. And I didn't want to waste my money by spending like $2,000 on a prep course, so I didn't take any of that. I really liked how I studied. If I was to take the GRE again, I would study in the same way. Thank you for watching it. If you like this, please click the like button and subscribe. And if you have any questions that you have about the GRE or just in general, leave it down in the comments and I will try to help you with it. Bye.